Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee in 2025. I've received apologies for today's meeting from Joe Fitzpatrick and Sandesh Gohani. The first item on our agenda is for committee to agree to take items 5, 6, 7 and 8 in private. Are members agreed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take oral evidence from representatives of the Scottish Professional Football League and the Scottish Football Association on welfare and sustainability in Scottish youth football. And I welcome to the committee Neil Doncaster, Chief Executive of the Scottish Professional Football League, and Ian Maxwell, Chief Executive of the Scottish Football Association. And we're going to move straight to questions. So can I ask if you can set out the Scottish Football Youth Development System and how it operates?
That's a big question. Development from a player perspective, I suppose, starts at a very early stage. So we have programmes in place from 4 years old. There's Fun Fours. We want to engage young Scottish children as early as possible in football and sport generally, because everybody's aware of the benefits that brings. Over the kind of early stages of their football engagement, that goes from 4-a-side to 5-a-side to 7-a-side to 9-a-side. We've got programmes and processes and coaching techniques in place to help develop players over those years. That then moves to 11-a-side at around about under 13. And up to that point, they've been under the jurisdiction of the SYFA and SWF, so the Scottish Youth Football Association and Scottish Women's Football. We obviously are involved in those processes and programmes and make sure that, from a coaching perspective, that things are being done the way that we feel that they should. At 13, they move either into Club Academy Scotland, our Club Academy Scotland programme in the boys' game, or they stay within the SYFA and play more in the grassroots game, and that process continues until 16, 17, when players either turn professional or they go and continue their football development in a grassroots context, and then move on to amateur football and such like. So, it spans every age. We have players at 4, we have players at 96 that play walking football, and all of those are part of the footballing pathway, the player journey as we see it.
Journey, and I know that you'd launched a new document on that in February this year, so can you update committee on progress in implementing that?
Yeah, so the player journey's changing and evolving as football evolves, as life evolves, and what we're finding now is traditionally there has been a desire to have players in clubs and players play for teams. Actually, what we're seeing now is players just want to play. They want to play with their friends. They want to be involved in it in a social context. It's less about the competitive element. And a big focus that we've had recently is on making sure that there are opportunities and pathways and places for those players that don't think they're going to be footballers, don't want to be footballers, but they love playing with their friends. They love being part of a team. They love that. They love the physical challenges. They love everything that being part of a sport involves, but they don't really enjoy that competitive element. So we're looking, in conjunction with the SYFA, in conjunction with other partners, at those opportunities. So we've got a number of programmes that we run up and down the country at various age groups that use football as the hook. You use football as the chance to engage young people, to get them better attainment at school. We've got an extra time programme that gives kids breakfast in the morning. It gives them a bit of physical activity before they go to school. It gives them a bit of after school care, and the results that we see from that are huge. The attainment's up, attendance is up. The impact that has on the individuals themselves is really significant, and it's about looking at football from a well-being perspective as opposed to purely from a competitive. We want to develop good players. Obviously we do, and developing good players is important, and the performance and the success of the men's and women's national team is a key driver for a lot that happens across the country, and we've got a big part to play. But there's as much focus on developing people, developing individuals, giving them tools that they will use for the rest of their life, not just in a footballing context, and that's been a focus of our player journey, to make sure that there are those opportunities.
And how are you evaluating and monitoring the progress of that plan?
Effectively just through participation numbers. Participation numbers continue to grow. We monitor that on an annual basis. we are seeing participation across every element of the game. So obviously the boys' game has been long-standing in the sense of the girls' and women's games pretty much in its infancy by comparison, but we're seeing participation numbers at boys' football, women's football, para-football, all the different disciplines that we've got. We're seeing participation continue to increase because there is such engagement across the country. That then leads to other challenges because whilst participation's increasing, everybody that wants to play needs somewhere to play, and we have a facility challenge across the country. There's no doubt about that. We've launched our own pitching in facility fund, which is looking to raise 50 million over the next 5 years to upgrade existing pitches, to build new pitches, and also to look at changing facilities and community spaces, because particularly in the girls' and women's and the para game, the facilities that I would have used when I was a youngster aren't fit for purpose anymore for the needs of particularly girls', women's and para footballers. So we're looking at the sporting infrastructure across the country and we will raise our own funds, which we can then put to good use across the country to try and make those improvements. Because, like I said, everybody that wants to play needs somewhere to do it, and the facilities challenge that we have across the country is something that we're really keen to try and fix. And it'd be good to get the views of the committee on how we can bring that to life and what else we can do in those areas.
Mm-hmm. So you touched on the funding there that you're looking at raising. How much do you currently invest in the Scottish Youth Football?
That's a very good question. So, I mean, we've got direct investment that goes into the affiliated national associations, but more of the investment that we put in, we've got 70 regional staff up and down the country who spend all of their time engaging with grassroots clubs, engaging with local community clubs. So, I mean, it's a significant figure. I mean, I can come back to you with a defined number, but it's millions of pounds that we'll invest into youth football up and down the country on an annual basis.
So that's your staff, those 70 regional staff?
They're Scottish FA staff, yeah.
What about how much do you fund Scottish Youth Football Association?
So
direct funding.
Say that again, sorry.
Direct funding.
Direct funding. I think it's about £35,000 a year we give them in terms of a cash subsidy, effectively. Mm-hmm. They rent, they don't rent, they use the offices in Hampden, and there's in-kind support that they get from an organisational perspective to help them function. But the vast majority of the support that we give the SFA comes through, as I said, our regional staff who spend a huge amount of time dedicated to grassroots clubs. That's their only focus is grassroots clubs and grassroots football development. So whilst it's not direct funded into the SYFA, it is direct funded into the youth game across the country.
Mm-hmm. So 35k for the governing body of youth football doesn't sound like a great deal. That's probably less than one full-time employee.
I think that's a very particular view. As I said, we have 70 staff. There's the programmes that those guys produce. There's the programmes that those guys help the grassroots clubs run. So the figure that is invested by the Scottish FA into youth football up and down the country will be millions of pounds. I can come back with what that number is. I don't know that off the top of my head. But
I suppose I'm specifically looking at the governing body as opposed to the wider youth football. £35,000 doesn't sound like a great deal of money to be investing in the body that is governing all of that activity right across the country.
The governing body will generate their own income. They have the option to do that, obviously through whether it's commercial partnerships. There will be a fee that clubs pay to affiliate with the National Association. So the SYFA as a body will generate significantly more than the income that we give them. And as I said, we need to look at the bigger picture rather than direct investment, which is a specific amount into the SYFA. There is a much broader investment that goes into youth football as a whole across the country.
Mm-hmm. It's still quite a small figure for the governing body. I mean, I would imagine that your organisation gets much more investment than £35,000 a year, and you're able to generate money elsewhere.
What do you mean we get investment? What do you mean? So the vast majority of the income that we have is generated by us, whether that's men's A, whether it's women's A, whether it's commercial partnerships. Mm-hmm. The vast majority comes in through those. So
you don't get any money from Sports Scotland or anything?
No, we do. We don't get a lot, but we do.
How much do you get?
We get £1.3 million a year from Sports Scotland, which is invested into various elements of the game up and down the country, and that 1.3 million has been static for, I'm going to say, close to 10 years. So in real terms, it's a lot less than that now. So again, I mean, you talk about our direct investment into the SYFA, you look at the amount of players, the amount of engagement, the amount of individuals that we connect with up and down the country, that 1.3 by the same measure wouldn't feel like a significant number.
It's an awful lot more than 35,000. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, gentlemen. Can you set out your position in relation to issues raised by Real Grassroots and the Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland in their complaints concerning Scottish football's treatment of young players?
Thank you very much, David, for the question. And just to reiterate, both Ian and I are extremely grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning and to correct some of the misinformation that has been presented to this committee in the past. So we have outlined in detail in our written submissions our position on the 4 rules that were being questioned by Real Grassroots and others, and I'm very happy to set out our position on all 4 of those rules now. So the first of those is the SPFL rule that requires clubs to pay a development contribution when a youth player moves from one club to another club. As we've made clear on numerous occasions, and to the best of our knowledge, no development contribution has ever been paid under SPFL rules. And that's because there's a SPFL rule F36, which made it clear that no development contribution is payable where the Scottish FA have rules in place for reimbursement of training costs for youth players. And because the Scottish FA have always, over the 27-year history of the SPFL, had such rules in place, no SPFL development contribution has ever been due. But, for the avoidance of any doubt, the SPFL has now removed all rules on development contribution from its rulebook. So I hope that deals with issue 1. The second point of contention was the no approach rules, and there is actually 2 sets of different rules here. The first is the Scottish FA rule that prohibits Club Academy Scotland players from approaching another club, and there was somewhat inaccurate commentary on the 17th of June about fines of £10,000 for breaching that rule. To be clear, Scottish FA rules do not allow for fines of £10,000 to be imposed, and in fact no fine has ever been levied on a young player, as far as we're aware, under the no approach rule. But the SFA does intend to remove that rule following consultation with its stakeholders. The SPFL has a similar rule, which has now been amended so that it now only applies to professional players. So separately to that, there is a Scottish FA rule that forbids clubs from approaching a CAS player without complying with the SPFL's rules on commitment letters. And those rules require approaches by clubs to be conducted through the player's existing club in the first instance. And that system serves legitimate public interest objectives by helping to prevent the exploitation of young players and prevent undue pressure being placed upon them. So the Scottish Youth FA, whose chair is the Real Grassroots co-founder Scott Robertson, has a very similar rule in its own rulebook, as do many other sports. So, in short, we do believe that the rules regarding approaches by clubs are both proportionate and necessary, but going forward, there will be no rule preventing youth players or their parents from approaching another club to seek a transfer to that club. The third area of contention was the so-called no-poach rule, which prevents elite-level CAS clubs from signing more than one player from another CAS club within the same age group in the same or the immediately preceding season. And the Scottish FA has now started a consultation with stakeholders to establish whether that rule should remain in its current form. And the final area of contention was so-called unilateral extension. So an allegation that CAS clubs are able to unilaterally extend the registration period for their players. But the rule that allowed that to happen was actually removed from the Scottish FA rulebook in August 2022, and the committee were informed of that change then. So a player signing a registration form with an elite level CAS club at age group 15 can enter into a 24-month fixed registration, but that can only be terminated with the agreement of both the player and the club, and all other registrations last for 12 months. So to be clear, and contrary to what has been previously suggested to the committee, CAS clubs cannot unilaterally extend the registration period of young players. So I hope that deals with the 4 areas of concern that have been brought to this committee. Thank you.
How would you respond to children are seen as economic assets and have rights? And how are their human rights protected, and how is this governed?
Yeah, I think there are some, perhaps some in the Children's Commissioner's office that don't recognise the importance of having a system of training compensation in place. But that training compensation regime that exists, that's within the Scottish FA's rulebook, is entirely within the statutes of FIFA and UEFA regulations, and enables those clubs who spend a lot of money on the development and training of young players are able to be reimbursed for that expense, but only at the point where a player who has moved to another club when they sign professional. And that's entirely within the remit of FIFA statutes.
How does the rules concerning the development contributions and infrastructure in place to facilitate transfers between youth academics differ between Scotland and the rest of the UK, and why are these differences there?
Well, as I've already set out, in terms of development contribution, there's never been any development contribution paid, as far as we're aware, in the 27-year period of the history of the SPFL, because the Scottish FA has always, in that time, had its own rules in relation to training compensation. But again, to avoid any doubt, we have now removed from that rule from the SPFL's rulebook. So there will always be minor differences between the regimes that exist in different parts of the world, but the regime that exists in Scotland is entirely consistent with that which you'll see in the majority of countries within FIFA jurisdiction.
Have you considered adopting FIFA's compensation and solidarity contribution model, and if not, why not?
That's probably more a question for Ian, given that the Scottish FA is the FIFA member.
Well, that's what we've got. We've got the FIFA system. The FIFA system says that, and FIFA governance looks at cross-border movement of players. So from one Scottish FA to English, French, wherever that may be, they concern themselves with that. And the system they have in place is that once a player moves, there is a training contribution that's paid at the point of that move. Now, that can only happen because of EU law and Brexit and all those things. That can only happen when players get to 18 now. And that's what we've got as Scottish football. We have the same system. So we had a previous system whereby there was a training compensation fee that was due at the point the player moved from Club A to Club B. We removed that after consultation with the committee and moved it in line with the FIFA statutes. So the fee is only triggers when the player signs his first professional contract. So if a player moves at 13, under 13s from one club to another, no fees due at that point. The solidarity model is one that FIFA take, if there's a transfer fee paid for a player, FIFA take 5% of that transfer fee and they spread that round all the clubs that have developed that player at any point in his player journey. And we've got that model in our rule book at the moment. It only applies to Scottish domestic transfers, so that it would only be triggered if a Scottish player moved within Scotland from one Scottish club to obviously from one Scottish club to another Scottish club. Because if it's a foreign player, that would be captured under the FIFA solidarity contribution. So when a Scottish player goes to England, an example would be John McGinn transfers from Aston Villa to wherever he goes next. There would be a solidarity element of that would come back into the Scottish game because it's happened outside of Scotland, if you see what I mean. So I think there is a bit of a misconception that we've developed our own system and we're just doing what we want. What we have is almost identical. Well, it's identical in terms of when the training contribution is paid. And the point you asked about other countries, everybody has a system. Everybody's system is slightly different because there's cultural reasons, there's economic reasons, there are a variety of reasons why every system within a country would need to be different. But you look at everybody talks about England, and most of the time it's not the right comparator, because from a footballing perspective they are miles ahead of us. But they have a system whereby a fee is paid at the point the player moves. So in recent history there have been 13, 14, 15-year-olds that have moved club in England, and that's triggered a training compensation payment to be made at that point. So, and we've moved away from that, obviously, in conjunction with the committee. So, as Scottish football, we are comfortable with the processes that we've got in place, with the regulations that we've got in place, and that they mirror the FIFA setup.
Thank you. No further questions?
A bit to the no poach rule, and this was an issue that was raised with us in the session with Real Grassroots. And the other panel members. So essentially, if I'm reading this right, so elite CAS clubs can sign one player per age group from another CAS club per season. That's the rules, okay. But we're talking about children here, and we're talking about children who have, parents who may well move around the country for work or for whatever reason.
Yes.
So, what mechanism is there to protect, say, a child who's playing in a CAS situation in, say, Glasgow, and the parents then move to Aberdeen, if there's already been a transfer in that season?
The child would be allowed to move.
The child would be allowed to move.
The clubs can agree that.
Okay.
So we have that rule in place, and that rule was implemented at the point that we moved the training compensation to only being due when the first professional contract was signed. So we put that rule in place, but there is a I can't remember if I think it is written in the rule that the clubs can agree. So whilst it's only one player can go from one club to another, if both clubs agree, which is exactly what would happen in that case, because that happens, and if anybody thinks for a minute that Scottish football clubs aren't letting a player whose family are moving from Glasgow to Aberdeen to move club, I mean, that's just absolute fantasy. There is no world in which that would be allowed to happen. No world.
That's good to hear. That's why I wanted to get you to put something on record.
Yeah.
Because although we're talking about, I appreciate it's a business, I appreciate the clubs are businesses, at the end of the day we're talking about children and children's welfare.
Absolutely.
Ryan Whittle.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. It's just on that point. It strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that rule prevents a bigger club coming in and hoovering up a whole load of players to sit on a bench at one of the bigger clubs. Am I wrong in that?
No, it does, and it's about balance. We have to find the balance between movement of players. There's a cap on the number of players that an academy can have, but if we had a situation which didn't have that, and an SYFA club which was doing really well lost all their players every year to a CAS club, you would be asking us the opposite question: why do you not put a cap on that? Because that's disruptive. It's about the focus of all our regulations is on around preventing disruption to the player, because Club A have got a squad at under 13s. They want to actually go and take all these players from this team because they're a better team. They do that. What happens to these guys that are here? We need to look after them as well. So it's about the balance between being recognising that players need to move and players will want to move, and there'll be different reasons for that. And actually, what we see as a reality is players do move on a regular basis. I think there is a perception that's been portrayed that clubs are holding players against their will. Again, it doesn't happen. The reputation that a club has within a club academy, within any setting, is key, because if they want to go and attract players, their reputation for looking after players has to be really good, because it's football, it's sport. Parents talk, players talk, everybody talks. If somebody finds out something that's not quite right, the footballing world finds out about it very, very quickly. So it's in everybody's best interest that movement of players is allowed to happen as much as we need it to. But when you think about the Club Academy Scotland setup, they get excellent provision, they get the best coaches, they get the most qualified coaches, they get diet and nutrition, how help, they get educational support. All these clubs have got full-time child wellbeing and protection officers. We've got a raft of measures, and we can talk. We can send you information, or we can talk through them now to make sure that the experience those players get within a Club Academy Scotland setting is the best in the country. So it's logical then that there wouldn't be a lot of movement, because they're getting a really good experience and they're enjoying being there. That's not to say that they can't, and if there is a problem, they go and have a conversation with their clubs. The clubs and the parents meet at least twice a year. They've got exit strategies in place to look after players when it comes to the end of the footballing journey with that club. So we have a range of measures that are designed to protect the child and look after the player and make sure that their experience is as good as it can be. So I think that's worth remembering, and you know, it would be worth whether the committee want to come into Hampden or go and visit an academy club and just understand exactly how it works and see it for yourselves, because this committee has been on the go for a long time. We've been talking about this for a long time. I don't know over that period how many committee members have actually gone to an academy, sat down with players and parents and coaches and clubs and talked to them and understood from their perspective what the experience is like. And I would absolutely urge anybody that wants to do that to let us know, and we can facilitate that at any academy around the country. They will be delighted to have you, because you know the perception is not the reality. We can't argue with anecdotal. We know players are being held against their will. Our experience, it doesn't happen. If it is happening, those players need to come and speak to us, and we will sort the problem for them.
Okay.
Thank you, Convener. Maybe go on from that point. You know, some of the evidence that we've heard in some of the other committees, you know, it's about that power imbalance with families. And I suppose my question would be, what can you do if what you're saying to us is that you're really, you know, against any of those things, you know, as the welfare of children that's uppermost in your mind? How do we make sure that we right that power imbalance, that families may feel pressure from clubs in terms of not wanting it to disadvantage their young person?
Yeah, it's more about the processes and the practices both within the club and within the association, and making parents and players aware when there is an issue, where is their first port of call. So as I said, in an elite academy set up, they will have a full-time child wellbeing and protection officer within each club. We obviously do a lot of training with them, we do a lot of monitoring with them, and any issues that they get, if they need any support or any advice, they can come to us. The parents have regular contact with coaches, so and at the start of a season that will set out a kind of level of expectation about where they see that player within the squad, what they see that journey looking like over the course of a year. They need to have at least 2 parents' nights over the course of a season to continue that engagement. But if they're unhappy at their club, they do and they will come and speak to the association, and we can then have conversations with the club to understand what the problems are and try and find a remedy. And ultimately, if the player's unhappy, we have a child wellbeing panel process in place, which we have only used 3 times since its inception, but in each time the panel has found in favour of the player and the contract, the registration has been terminated. So there's experience and there's evidence of the processes that we have in place and how they look after the child and the player and focus on the child and the player. I accept the point that, you know, that power imbalance, for want of a better expression, is there across sport, and that's a challenge that sport has to face and sport has to deal with. But it's about understanding that when a player signs for a club, making sure they understand what the regulations are, making sure they understand what the obligations that they've taken on are, making sure they understand what the club's obligations are to them, and making that as user-friendly and as child-friendly and as understandable as possible. We've done a lot of work on our website, and there's information that we now give and ask clubs to give players and parents as soon as that registration process begins, as soon as they start to show interest in any sort of player. How do we set that out as straightforwardly as possible so that everybody knows where they go when things don't go the way they want to?
Okay. Can I ask, you know, the recommendations from the Public Petitions Committee report in 2020, you know, how much time and effort has gone into, you know, you're saying that you know the rules are working for young people and that you are committed to that.
Yeah.
How much work have you done right through the system to make sure that everybody understands that the rules, you know, that report was valued and you want the recommendations to be implemented?
Yeah, but I mean that will always be an ongoing work in progress, and part of the challenge you have you'll have parents that want to understand more than others. You'll have some parents with the best will in the world that will see a club wanting to sign their child and go, right, this is brilliant, he's going over there. And, you know, we see pictures on a regular basis of parents sitting at a boardroom table, the family are all there, everybody's absolutely delighted because their son signed a registration with a CAS club. So it's about increasing that awareness, and as I said, when we talk about parents' nights, when we talk about the information that we give players at the point that they're registering with a club, and we make sure that the parents are aware of, it's just about keeping those awareness levels up and giving them opportunities to ask questions and somewhere to go if they've got a question mark about registration processes. It's a constant evolving piece of work.
And you would give it priority, making sure that the clubs continue to work on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I ask about the Competition and Marketing Authority? They didn't undertake any investigation, but they did write to you. Have you made that public, what recommendations that they said in their letter?
No, we've not. The legal advice that we got was that there's obviously confidentiality around that process. Now, that said, we did send the committee an update on the correspondence that we've had with them. And just to be clear, and the CMA were very clear in the letter they sent us, they have not made any formal finding or any allegation that any competition law rules have been breached. What they asked us to do was carry out a self-assessment against competition law, to take legal advice from a competition law perspective, to review the company law risks that we have regularly, and to make any changes that we see fit as off the back of those discussions. So that's what we've done. We're in regular dialogue with our legal experts on it. The Scottish FA Board have gone through competition law training, which was the first time we've done that, and it was really interesting because it's never something that we've done before as a board, and we learned a lot from that, not only in terms of youth registrations but more generally across football. And we are continuing to engage with the CMA. We met them very quickly after they got in touch with us, and we set out a plan that said, you know, these are the rules that we're working on. We've let them know about the changes that we've made, that Neil talked about earlier on, and we will continue that dialogue with them.
Just one last point, if I might, Convener, as you talked about sport in general and about the fact that, you know, children should be doing sport for health and well-being. We understand we're trying to train players for the future. Of course, we all do. We love sport and competition as well. How much interaction have you had with Sports Scotland and other sort of national agencies about the complaints that have been made against yourselves, and how we make sure that that there's a more positive going forward, working together in that area?
Yeah, I mean, we speak to Sports Scotland on a regular basis. I have regular catch-ups with Forbes and Lobb, their chief exec, but within the organisation we've got a partnership manager. There's regular engagement around about the funding that we get, how we're spending that, what we're using that to focus on. They're aware of the CMA correspondence, obviously, and we've told them as much as we can on it. There is this starts to get into Club Academy Scotland, and you're starting to get into competition law in the more elite level of the game, so that's less of a focus for Sports Scotland. Sports Scotland are more focused on grassroots development, player development, and younger age group. So it's a slightly different relationship we have with them in terms of the topics that we cover off, but they're obviously very aware of it.
Thanks, Convener.
So you spoke earlier about some consultation that you're going to do on various rule changes.
Yeah.
Who will you consult with?
Clubs and players. So we have various ongoing club meetings, club consultations that happen. I mean, there's a lot of things that we consult our clubs on, as you can imagine. There's a competition working group that sits under the SPFL remit, and we attended that earlier this month to talk about these rule changes. And when Neil talked about the no approach rule, I mean that will be changed. There's absolutely no reason why that rule won't be changed. We then need to work out the consultation with the players, and that's something that through our child wellbeing team we have done more and more on a more regular basis, particularly over recent years, because the young players' voice is critical in understanding the environment that they perceive, that that they live in, that they play football in, because with the best will in the world, Neil and I and our governance department can sit and work out what a rule should look like, but how does that actually work in practice, and what does that mean for the young player? So there has to be that engagement. We do that regularly the last time we did that, it was through the Children's Parliament. They were commissioned to undertake a survey of, and that was more grassroots football, but it did include some Club Academy Scotland clubs. And the feedback from that was, unsurprisingly, that the players love playing football, they love playing sport, they love being out with their friends, they love being part of a team. And then you get into the negatives, and every negative was, we don't like it when our parents shout at us, we don't like it when our coaches shout at the other coaches, we don't like it when the parents shout at the ref, we don't like it when, you know, it was everything that they didn't like had an adult or a parent or a coach involved. And that is a big part of the work that we're undertaking at the moment. So we have a Let Them Play, 2 separate campaigns, one's called Let Them Play and one's called Let Them Ref. So Let Them Play is, we are trying to get parents to do exactly what it says in the tin and stand at the side of the pitch and just watch, because they've got coaches, the players have got coaches that will make them better players, and too many voices just confuses things. And with the best will in the world, there are a lot of players that stand at the side of a pitch that have never played the game, have never done a coaching badge, but will sit and dissect tactics till the cows come home. So how do we try and dull that noise, get everybody on the side of a pitch to behave appropriately, because, you know, behaviour at grassroots football is a problem, behaviour at senior football can be a problem, and this isn't a Scottish issue. Every time I'm in UEFA company, the big thing that comes up is behaviour at the grassroots game, within the grassroots game, and the behaviour of adults. So we have a real campaign on to try and positively impact that, because we want the experience to be right for the players, and we have a Let Them Ref campaign which does the same, because everybody knows the scrutiny that referees are under, and that translates right down to the very early stages. I mean, we've got 14, 15, 16-year-old referees who are walking away from the game because of the abuse they get at the side of a pit, and that just can't happen. That's embarrassing in this day and age that we're seeing those types of instances. So how do we, through those campaigns, really raise the public awareness and try and positively impact on that really negative behaviour?
Yeah, and I don't think there's anyone in the committee would disagree with that that behaviour should be appropriate on all sides in terms of support.
But that's probably a wider sport thing as well. I don't think that will be specific to football. So again, what can we do as a country to try and improve that?
So it's heartening to hear that you've done some consultation via Children's Parliament. But you mentioned that your consultation on the rules would be clubs and players. Have you given any thought to widening those stakeholders that you engage with? I'm thinking of organisations like the Children's Commissioner or youth advocacy services, legal experts.
I mean, listen, the world we live in, there will always be a legal expert that's required to give advice on any rule change that we want to implement. That's just the world that we're in. You know, obviously the primary stakeholders are the clubs and the players, and it's important that we engage with them. We hadn't really thought about anything wider than that. And that's not to say that we won't take that under consideration, but it wasn't something we thought of at this time, but we're happy to look at it.
Given that the concerns that have been raised over numerous years about children's welfare, expanding that role of stakeholders that you engage with, particularly the Children's Commissioner, may well be something that you should consider. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Karina. I should have declared an interest. My last question, and I actually have a grandson that's in the caste system, and loving it, by the way. I just wanted to follow on something that my colleague Carol Mockin mentioned, because she brought Sports Scotland into the conversation. Yeah. And it strikes me, the bit that interests me, or the bit that worries me actually, is not so much the fact that in an elite sport, very, very few will ever get to get a position of earning a living from that elite sport. So there's a lot of dropout, if you like. But these kids have a talent, they have a physical literacy, they have an ability. It's how are you managing that disappointment from their perspective, and I'm really interested in your relationship with Sports Scotland, because I think they've got a bigger role to play, and I have said this to Forbes as well. How between the two of you can you manage better that disappointment, because it's an inevitability that 99% of the kids in the caste system won't make it.
Yeah, do you know what? It's a good question, and I don't agree that 99% won't make it. Listen, it's elite sport, but if you look at Scottish football, we've got 4 SPFL leagues. We've got a Highland League, we've got a Lowland League, we've got East of Scotland leagues, West of Scotland leagues. those leagues all include players who are paid for playing football. So when we talk about making it, if we're talking about John McGinn and Scott McTominay, that is obviously the very few. Obviously, in every country, that is the very few. But actually, the Scottish football is full of players who have come through primarily a club academy system. Some will have come through grassroots football and will be late developers and all those things. But they are making a living from playing football, which I think we need to celebrate. I think that's a positive. I think people get fixated on the very small number that make £100,000 a week. There's a lot of people that make a good living playing football on a daily basis or as part of a weekend. So there's that point. In terms of dealing with the disappointment, because that is key, and I've been at a club and I understand that when you're sitting players down at 16, 17 and telling them that you're not going to give them a professional contract, or when you've got 25-year-olds that you're telling them you're not going to give them a professional contract, you've got a duty of care to those individuals as well. So from a Club Academy Scotland perspective, I touched on the engagement that parents have with clubs over the course of a season. At the point that the club recognises that actually that player's not one that we're not going to keep for whatever the reason might be, they then engage quickly with the parent, have a conversation with the parent, then because the first question is, who's going to tell the player? Does it come from the club or does it come from the parent? So that's a conversation that they'll have. They then look at what is the next step for that player. So if it's a Club Academy Scotland elite club, they'll have a conversation with the parents and the player that says, listen, do you want to try and stay at elite level? Do you think you maybe want to move down to progressive performance? Or do you want to go back to grassroots football and just play with your pals? What is best for you? Where do you think your football journey needs to go now for you? And depending on the outcome of that, they will then go and engage with whether it's other Club Academy Scotland clubs, whether it's other grassroots clubs, and try and find a home, try and find a club for that player. They'll send out medical data, they'll send out sports science data to Club Academy Scotland's clubs, because the technology and information that even at Club Academy Scotland, the understanding that they have of players is significant, and the information they hold is significant, so they can pass all that information on. There's obviously an offer of wellbeing support, particularly at elite level. That comes through the full-time child wellbeing and protection officers. And there are other things that clubs will do. I know a number have a relationship with one or two companies who look at sports scholarships in America, and that's a fairly popular destination for some of our players that aren't going to make it. They go over to America, they get a scholarship, they continue, or they start a university education over there, and they use their football as the means of achieving that, if you see what I mean. So again, it's another thing that once you ask the question and once you get under the bonnet of it and once we can have a discussion, there is a lot that happens that people just probably aren't really aware of because they're not in that world, so there's not really any reason for them to be. But again, it goes against the perception that clubs get a squad of 17-year-olds, they pick one and they go, right, the 22 others are you, right, thanks very much, see you later. That's not how it works. That is not how it works at all. And clubs will do a lot to make sure that they're looking after the players, because again, it comes down to that reputational piece. They want other parents and other players to be talking about, listen, I went there, it didn't work out for these reasons, but actually they helped me move over here and help my footballing journey continue. So there's a lot on. The Sports Scotland point is an interesting one, and again, and I'm going to talk about wider sport, but because there'll be things that happen. You know, rugby's a big sport. There'll be grassroots or elite rugby players that will get to that similar age, and what happens with them. And like you said, Brian, the resilience they develop, the physical literacy skills they've got. How do we make best use of them? Because and that's something that's kind of lost as well. I always feel that, particularly in a Club Academy Scotland setting, because of the provision they get, we're actually developing people. We're not just developing players, we're developing people. And they have an understanding of health and nutrition, they have an understanding of fitness, they understand what it's like to be in a team, they understand what it's like to take instruction, they understand what it's like to deal with disappointment and be resilient. You know, we are giving them people skills that that people that don't participate in sport don't have. So how do we take everybody that's coming out of sport and use them however best we can to help, and I'm going to say improve society, which sounds a bit of a big target, but you get the point. You know, we are developing better people as a result of the provision and the experience that they've had, and how do we utilise that. So they're happy to have a conversation with Sports Scotland or whoever that may be about how we how we use that best.
Can I come in? I think it's a very good question about managing disappointment of players, but the reality is that Ian and I are not involved at the coalface in those sorts of conversations. And I think it would be really, really valuable for members of this committee to come out to the Club Academy Scotland clubs to see how it works in practice, to talk to the players, to talk to the coaches who are having to deal with this very difficult work. I think that, understanding the reality of how this stuff works in practice, I think would be enormously valuable to the understanding of this committee.
Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to you. I'm interested in a couple of questions about the welfare of the children in terms of mental health and well-being. What oversight procedures are there in the academy system to monitor the young players' well-being? We've touched on it a little bit already. Are these adequate, and how might they be strengthened or improved?
Yeah, so I'll just talk you through, from a child wellbeing perspective, what the provisions are. So as I said, each Club Academy Scotland club must have a child wellbeing and protection officer at elite level. They're full time. Obviously, there's more clubs, there's more teams within the elite setup, so there's more players. So it makes sense that there's a full time individual. Those individuals can be part time the further down the Club Academy structure you go, but that's reflective of the number of teams and therefore the number of players. Those a club's processes are assessed by our wellbeing and protection team against our Scottish FA Board Directive, which was established in 2016, and there's also the 8 minimum standards in sport which are set out by Sport Scotland. So we assess a club's child wellbeing and protection provision against them. We have mandatory events that child wellbeing and protection officers need to attend over the course of a season. We send out newsletters a couple of times a year. We send out information on a regular basis. We've got a child wellbeing and protection officer WhatsApp group that links directly into our team at the Scottish FA. And we engage on a regular basis because with the best will in the world, it's a really difficult and a really sensitive area, and children's mental health, particularly nowadays, given other challenges in the world, is a key focus. So we want to support the individuals that are at those clubs as much as possible, so when there is a problem, they know the right place to go, they know we're signposting them in the right areas, we're giving them the right advice and the right support. It's about the clubs and the players understanding where they go. So it's not about the clubs, it's about the players understanding where they go if they have an issue that they want to discuss. So as part of the consultation, we have a participation officer who sits within our child and wellbeing team. He will engage annually with players at Club Academy Scotland clubs or clubs at our performance schools, and one of the questions they'll ask is, if you've got a problem, who do you speak to? And some players will be happier speaking to the CWPO, some players will be happier speaking to their coach, some players will be happier speaking to their parents. It just depends on that individual. But there are definitely opportunities for players that have got any sort of issue to speak to someone at the club, someone at the association, or obviously a parent, and the parent can then get in touch and we can move that on. I think it's really difficult. You can't. There's not a one size fits all, because it is different, and because every individual is different, and they'll be more comfortable speaking to some than others. It's about the player understanding, if I have a problem, I can speak to A, B or C, and they'll help me fix it.
Specific mechanisms in place for a parent or a child to seek support.
Yeah.
In various methods.
Yeah, primarily through the child wellbeing and protection officer, who's obviously a regular fixture at the club, and every player should know who they are, and they would be the first point of contact.
And the wellbeing officers, so they're mostly full time.
They're full time within an elite Club Academy Scotland setup. So there's 9 CAS clubs at the moment. I mean, every team, even in the grassroots game, they all have a child wellbeing and protection officer. That's part of the directive that the Scottish FA Board set out in 2016. So every club in the country has someone with that remit and with that responsibility. Obviously, if it's a grassroots team with one age group, then it's a different challenge from a grassroots team that might have a lot of clubs, and they'll tend to have more CWPOs as a result of that. But yeah, that's a defined position within the regulations.
Okay, just a final question. It's about what types of registration issues typically lead to a referral to the young players' wellbeing panel, and are there any common themes or patterns in the disputes that have reached the tribunal stage?
We've only had 3 cases reach the panel since I mean, I think it'll be getting close to 10 years that that panel's been in operation. So we don't see a huge amount. So we don't have, there are no trends. If there's only been 3 cases, there are no trends. You know, I think reasons that players, and this is from my club experience, reasons that it'll be straightforward when, you know, a player thinks they should be playing more than they are, they don't think they're getting enough game time, they don't think the coach likes them, all those things. And those are conversations that are had between the coach, between the player, between the parents, between the clubs, and like I said before, you know, we always tend to find a way. Either there is a conversation that goes on between the parties involved and a resolution is found, or the player will move on and go and find another club. That, I mean, that happens at every level of sport, at every level of, even in the grassroots game, there'll be players that think they should be playing more and aren't happy because they only got 15 minutes at the end of the game. That's sport. That's the world that we live in. But there are always opportunities, and the evidence that we have is that players are moving. You know, there is a perception that because of the registration period that players don't move during the season, but the evidence and the numbers that we've got tell us that that's absolutely not the case, and there is that movement.
Going back to the let them play and let them ref,
Yeah.
just to be clear, are you saying that is required in international football or at all levels, and also in other sports as well? Is that behaviour we're seeing, that, you know,
yeah.
people are even doing that in rugby, for instance?
Yeah, I think that'll be. I think it'll be across sport. Listen, football's the biggest sport in the country by a considerable distance. There'll be more. You'll see more people playing on a pitch of a weekend, and there'll be family and friends round about that watching the game. And like I said, it's not a Scottish problem. I mean, I've got a UEFA meeting later on this week, and one of the topics is behaviour at football matches and how we positively influence that, because it's having such a negative impact on the experience of the young players. And every country's fighting with the same. Fighting's a terrible word to use. Dealing with the same issues, and how do we positively influence the behaviour round about the pitch that means that players are just coming and they're just playing football and they're just having fun. And the first question somebody asked them is, did you enjoy it, not did you win? Because it can't be about that. That's the fundamental problem, you know. And listen, we've all, when my dad was speaking to his grandson, his first question would be, did you win, son? And Dad, did he have a good time? Was he running about with his pals? Did he enjoy it? That's the question you ask. You need to stop. We need to change that. So culturally, across football, across the world, there are challenges around about behaviour and around about that engagement between supporters and players on the pitch and referees, and that starts at the top end. And the behaviour that people see at the top end of the game then translates down into grassroots football on a Saturday morning in your local pitch. So how do we use? I mean, you saw at Euro 24 there was a UEFA instigated or implemented a captain-only approach rule, so only the captain can go and speak to the referee if there's a really contentious issue on the pitch. That's been really well received, and we've now implemented that across all football in Scotland, and it's having a real impact because players are understanding that I might be upset with a decision, but I just need to keep that to myself and let the captain deal with it. So how do we think about creative solutions like that we can implement through our UEFA position, through our FIFA position at the top end of the game, and then see that benefit and that behavioural change happen further down? But as I said, we have taken that on ourselves because of the amount of issues that we're seeing at particularly grassroots football over a weekend. We need to do something to deal with it.
Can I take you back to the wellbeing panels? And I appreciate you said there's only been 3 in 10 years. Can you talk me through the process of what happens there?
Well, I mean, in very, very high-level terms, we will receive some sort of communication from a parent, primarily, or a player. It could be either. We will discuss then with the player and the parent gather information, speak to the club. The Scottish FA, FA.
So someone from the SFA will contact.
Yeah. The association. We've got a governance department, and someone within that governance department will speak to the player, speak to the parents, understand what the issue is, have a conversation with the club, see if we can find a remedy without it getting to a wellbeing panel, and if we can't, then it would go to a wellbeing panel, and that has got defined processes, defined timescales, and it's all done with the I don't want to say safety, but with the protection of the player in mind. So a player can decide, do they want to give evidence at a hearing or do they want to do that outside of the hearing, and we submit that verbally or how that looks, because we're very aware that putting a young player into that environment would be really intimidating and really daunting, and we don't want, we need to go through the process to understand what the outcome is, but we need to do that with the kind of best will of the child in mind, because it's an incredibly difficult position to be in for an adult, never mind for a kid, and we don't want to put them through anything unnecessary.
Process?
It has to be. I think it has to be. That's the reality of it. You know, it's effectively a dispute between a player and a club. So we need to have formality. There needs to be regulation around that. We need to do it as quickly as we possibly can, because we don't want it to drag on. Because what's happening in the meantime is there's a player that's not playing. So we need to do it as swiftly as possible. We need to do it always looking after the player. And as I said, we've only had 3. Each of those 3 have found in favour of the player, and his registration has been cancelled with the club.
And so, acknowledging that what you have there, that it can be intimidating for parents and
yeah.
You know, I've sat where you're sitting, and it can be intimidating sitting in front of a committee. So what support is put in place for young players and their families to help them through that process so that they're able to participate? So
we will sit down initially with the parents and the player and talk them through what the process looks like. We have a child wellbeing team within Hampden, and they would be signposted to them to say if there's any support that you need, if there's anything you want to talk through, if there's anything that you're unhappy about, then please go and engage with them. And they are, although they're part of the association, they're not part of that wellbeing panel process. As you know, they're separate from that, which gives it a bit of separation and is someone different to go and speak to about any concerns that they've got. So there are provisions in place for that.
Okay. Elena Whittam.
Good morning to both of you. I want to spend a wee bit of time and just explore issues for the youngest children, so those under 11s. So the youngest category in the CAS programme is under 11. How confident are you that development centres have sufficient protections and support in place for the youngest players? And are there any specific rules and regulations that apply to this group of the youngest kids?
Yeah, so under 11s, there's Club Academy Scotland, but that's obviously at the point that it crosses over from SYFA and grassroots football, and we'll tend to find that there has been some sort of engagement between a Club Academy Scotland club and a number of grassroots clubs. So at that under 11 age group, clubs are looking for players, looking for talent in the local area. What we tend to find is clubs have not arrangements, but an understanding with a grassroots club that, you know, if they've got players, the players can come and get involved in training with the Club Academy Scotland club before they go and start, just to start that sort of I don't know what you would call the process, that sort of embedding process that gives the player an understanding of, right, if he's going to move club, he's going to move over here, and this is what that looks like. So they would actually do both at the same time. They would be participating with our grassroots team, and they would be starting their engagement with the Club Academy Scotland team at that point. So we try and make that as welcoming and as easy as possible, because we get, you know, any player at any point changing club, it's a difficult thing, and that can be for a variety of different reasons. So there's that process. I mean, I can come back to you with more detail. It's not something that I'm particularly close to from that level, but as I said, you know, the grassroots clubs all have child wellbeing and protection officers. The Club Academy Scotland club that the player's going to go to all have child wellbeing and protection officers in place, so there is provision round about the child's wellbeing.
So if we think about, you know, some of the clubs, there's a club that will start working with children at the age of 5, which is, you know, it's quite young. You think they're going to be running around their local pitches with their own small local teams. To what extent do you think that young children are mentally and physically ready to engage in the CAS programme? I understand from what you said, it's that kind of the dual engagements happening with their local club and the CAS programme at the same time. But are there any specific safeguards or protections in place to protect children as well from very over-enthusiastic parental influence? Which I think that, you know, you've already touched on in terms of the sidelines, but actually, you know, I think that there could be a lot of pressure placed on wee kids at that stage.
I think the parental racial relationship is a really, really difficult one for us to get involved in, obviously, because with the best will in the world, we don't know what the relationship between a parent and a child is. We do see parents who can get over enthusiastic when, you know, a Club Academy Scotland team shows interest in their player, and, you know, there's a lot of frustrated footballers out there that are living their life through their kids and their grandkids, and there's probably one sitting at the end of the table. But anyway, so how do we deal with that is a very good question. And as I said, it goes back to the earlier point about it's making sure that any player within the Club Academy Scotland system knows if they've got concerns about anything, who is the first port of call, who do I have the opportunity to go and speak to, who's you know, the Child Wellbeing and Protection Officers are there for that reason. So that's our engagement with players. Don't forget, all these players are also still at school, and they'll have a relationship with a teacher. There are opportunities within a school setting to go and talk about something else that's happening outside of their school life that they feel more comfortable talking to a teacher or someone within a school setting. And so there are opportunities. I get that's not in a football, that's not a football provision as such, but it's about making sure that there are a number of areas that children and young people can go to if they have concerns. So I take the point. It's a difficult question to answer, but we have got child wellbeing protection policies and officers in place that are a port of call for players.
And do they have due regard to just the needs of those youngest kids? Because if you think about the setting that's maybe hothousing somebody from a very young age into, you know, hopefully progressing, but that's quite intensive for somebody that's that young.
And I don't know for sure, but I don't think we'll have many clubs that go down as young as 4 and 5 and start to get players at that age and right the way through. The clubs will recognise that actually at that age it's about development. They're going to develop better players if they're happy, if they're enjoying their football, and it's about them playing with their pals with the best will in the world at that age particularly. So I don't think, and I'm happy to come back to you on it, but that club environment starting at that young and being structured, you know, as structured as it is when you get to 14, 15, 16, that's not the case. It's about enjoyment at that. It's about enjoyment at that age and making sure that a player's got somewhere to play, but they're having a good time and developing properly, because they should just be touching the ball and again just having fun. It's not about, you know, that's the very early stages of their development. It's about enjoyment at that point.
I think it might be quite helpful if the committee gets a little bit more information from yourself in terms of those officers, those wellbeing safeguarding officers that are engaged in clubs, actually what understanding they have of the youngest children, because it's very different from a teenager to a 5-year-old and 8-year-old and their own agency. So I think that would be helpful if you could give us that information. Thanks. Thank you.
So picking up on that, some of the examples that committee has had is Celtic Football Club having a 5-year-old, Motherwell a 7-year-old, Rangers having an 8-year-old. Do you think 5, 6, 7, 8 is too young to be signing on to an academy training programme?
They'll be in some sort of development programme. It won't be an academy programme. They're not, you know. That's the formative, very early part of a player development journey. Now, we do see, and we see this across Europe, that clubs are looking younger and younger to try and identify players. I mean, we're of a view that, or I'm of a view certainly, that there is no way you know at 5 or 6 or 12 or 13 whether a player is going to be a good player when he gets to 18, 19 or 20. That's really, really difficult to do. But when we investigate the countries that develop players really, really well, they've got a very wide base of players. So if you think about the elite football pyramid, the wider the base is at the bottom, the more engagement, the more players that they're aware of, the more chance they've got of identifying them later on in their career. So clubs are committing more resource to those very younger age groups, but it's more just going out and seeing who's there. They're not making decisions on players. You know, they might get players along to specialised training nights or training nights specifically with that club, but the player will be allowed to go and play with his grassroots team on a regular basis, because that's where he's going to develop. It's more just the way football's evolving and sports evolving that you know, clubs are trying to identify talent at a younger and younger age group. But again, there's provisions in place around about that and around about player movement, and that all sits within the SYFA.
I appreciate what you're saying, that it won't be a sort of formal training programme that maybe that a 15, 16-year-old even it would be engaged in. Do you think there should be a lower age limit? Do you think there should actually be a ceiling where you say, no, you can't engage children in this if they're below 5, or if they're below 6 or below 7?
Yeah. Let me check what the rules, what the regulations actually are, because I'm not close enough to that at this point, because we may well have some sort of protections in place about that at those age groups. I don't know. I mean, I'm not even too sure what they do from a registering with a team at that age, whether they can just turn up. You know, you would want them just to be able to turn up and play and go wherever they want. So let me come back on the registrations and the formality round about that, because I don't want to speak out of turn on it.
I would appreciate that. Thank you. No Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Convener. I've been listening with obviously great interest in what the gentlemen have to say. I'm particularly interested around youth development standards, and when we're talking about this, we're really talking about coaching and development of coaches, and how, because coaches are the ones that interact, coaches are the ones that are on the coalface. And I just want to put this on record, if I could, Convener. I'm looking at the list of issues and concerns that have been raised against the CAS academies, and one of the things it says here, and I quote here, it says academy coaches often spend more time coaching the worst players than the top players. That's a massive red flag for me in terms of coaching, because guess what? The best coaches should be coaching the development ones. That really worries me that there's people are still thinking that way, and that's across the whole of sport. The best, because you have to get the fundamentals right, and the way to get the fundamentals right is because the best coaches work with the developmental players. So I think my question is really around the coaching structure, coach education, and not just in terms of practically what they should be doing. How are you working with coaches, and how's the coach development working in terms of how you should interact with 5-year-olds right the way through to 18-year-olds? How are you working with that element of it?
Good question. So we've got a coach development pathway which starts at 1.1, 1.2 level licences, which are for. And what we tend to find is, particularly in the very early stages in its grassroots schemes, it's parents that become coaches. You know, I was one, obviously. I played football and had a bit more of an understanding, but you end up getting roped into helping coach your son's team because somebody has to do it. So a lot of those experiences are from parents. The 1.1, 1.2 coaching requirement that we've got, those levels aren't really about coaching. They don't really tell you how to put on a coaching session and about a passing drill and about, you know, but they'll talk about how you organise the players. There's a mental health and wellbeing module that they're required to do as part of that, because they're actually just looking after the players at that point. They're looking after the players' welfare at those very, very early years. So it's less about developing skills. It's more about making sure the environment's right and that the players are going to enjoy it and the players know what they're getting, and the coach can look out for issues. You know, if a player comes and their attitude or their behaviour's changed, then what can be the reasons for that? Because at those early years, it's more about child wellbeing and protection rather than actual coaching. There will be an element of coaching to it because you want people to have the basics, but it is the very basics at that age. And the coach education journey and the coach development journey and the way we develop players is something that we are always reviewing, always looking for other ideas, looking at countries that have developed players, that are developing players better than we are. What can we take from them? We need to be careful that we've always got a Scottish solution, because you can't just transfer what happens in Brazil over to here and expect us to be as good as Brazil in 20 years' time. It's just, culturally, it's just, as much as we would love that, culturally it's just not going to work that way. So that's under constant review. You know, we have a successful national team at the moment. We've obviously got a really good chance of qualifying for the World Cup. We've been to do back-to-back Euros, but our focus at the moment is what's the national team going to look like in 20 years' time, because those are the players that are starting our Club Academy Scotland. Those are the ones that are, you know, 10s, 11s, 12s. They've got 10 years to develop into first, you know, top footballers, which then helps the national teams, which then helps the country and brings all the joy that football does to Scotland. So we are always looking at that. You'll be aware of the transition report that we released recently, and that's got cooperation agreements which are in place now, and we've seen a good take-up of them across the start of this season, and that is getting younger players, and by younger I mean that 17, 18, 19 age group, that is getting them competitive football at an earlier age than they were previously because of the changes we've made there. we are pushing clubs to become more strategic about how they develop, particularly Scottish talent, because our obligation, I suppose, is to make sure that clubs are developing Scottish players. Do we have enough Scottish players playing in the Premier League at the moment? No. Can we do more to get Scottish players playing? Yes. How do we do that is the million-dollar question. But clubs need to be more strategic. You know, when you look at Portugal, that have got Benfica and Sporting Lisbon, in countries that are really successful at developing their own players, they get them into the first team, they sell them abroad for tens of millions of pounds, which is then reinvested back into the Portuguese football and ecosystem. How do we get our clubs to start thinking more strategically and go down that road and think about development from that perspective? So, you know, and the changes that we make and the changes that we're looking to make, we've got a youth review that will be published soon, which talks about a lot of this and talks about changes that we feel that we need to make sure that we're developing players. But even things like, you know, within Club Academy Scotland, we've got 150 players that are covered by a growth and maturation exemption, and that means that obviously players at those younger age groups particularly develop physically at some quicker than others. And actually, rather than looking at things as being, you're an under 14 player, you need to play under 14s, actually, see if you're 7'2", you can go and play in under 15s because you'll develop better there. Or if you're 4'2", you can go and play in under 13s because you'll develop better there. So there's a lot of different ways that we need to look at developing players and making sure everybody's got that opportunity. But you know, the coaching point is a key one. And from a Scottish FA perspective, we have a coach education system that means we are coaching coaches. The best players will only be as good as the coaches that they've got. And we need to make sure that we are coaching the coaches to be the best they can be.
I think that's kind of really my point there in terms of, you know, yeah, we want to have the greatest players in the world and whatnot, and we have had in the past, and we might get to that if we get time. But I think I'm interested in the coaching, how you coach, how the instruction culture works, how we develop our coaches. One of the things that has been levelled against in the past is the number of people that are in the queue to get a PVG check, to get a coaching licence, which is getting, you know, let me tell you from my perspective, it's getting harder and harder to get a coaching licence. But there's been, I mean, I think if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, I think the last time we had the discussion it was around 2,000 coaches waiting to get PVG checked and waiting to get through their coaching licence. My concern is are these coaches still coaching before they get to the point where they understand that coaching is not just about setting a session, as you've rightly said. Coaching is about developing of the person. Where are we in terms of you know, the queue?
As I said, we very much have a focus on that. You know, the coaching courses that we've got. I mean, every coach that's been through any Scottish FA coaching badge has gone through a mental health and wellbeing module. That is absolutely paramount that everybody does that, particularly the coaches that are involved at the very youngest of ages. So, listen, we want to develop coaches as much as coaches want to be developed, because some coaches are only there, you know, they're helping out because they're a parent, and actually they're not really interested in being a coach. They're just doing it because their son or daughter wants to play and they want to help facilitate that.
Do that.
They still need
even at level one.
They still need the basics, because it's about the environment. You know, it's about and that basic. You know, see if you've been a professional player for 25 years, you still need to go and do the basics, because it's fundamentally different being involved in professional elite sport at the top end of the game and then going and coaching 5 and 6 and 7 year olds. That is a completely different landscape. So there has to be, and we are very clear that there has to be a level of coaching provision. We are also under the UEFA Coaching Convention, so UEFA set out their requirements for national associations in terms of the coaching provision that they have in place across the country. They will come and assess what we've got on a regular basis and approve that or not. Now, not approving it is obviously not a great place for us to be, but they are very comfortable with the coaching provision we've got in place, with the courses that we've got in place, and the content that's contained within those courses. So,
final question, if I could, convener. Let's get to the seniors. That transition out of CAS into the senior ranks. Hardest thing in the world. If you're looking for good coaches, look at the ones that have managed to make that transition. How are we developing our coaches to do that? You touched on maybe looking at the way other countries are doing it more successfully than us.
Yeah.
Where are we in terms of that learning experience?
Yeah, so as I said, it's a constantly evolving picture because everybody does it slightly differently, and I think there's a danger that you get too caught up in what other countries do and you don't have a Scottish solution. So we've done a lot of work, and as I said, we've got a youth review that will be published hopefully before the end of this year. We've got a new strategy that's coming out that's going to talk about player development and how we do that and the lessons that we have learned from other countries. So it's difficult. It's difficult to make sure that we're doing it right. I think sports science, growth and maturation studies, the physical impact that repetitive training has on players at 12, 13, 14, we're finding more and more evidence of the impact that has, and as a result you then need to change what you've been doing, because with the best will in the world we can't just continue to plough ahead. There is evidence out there that says that depending on the age and stage of the individual, their training has to look and feel slightly differently to make sure you're getting the benefit of them. Are we doing enough at the younger age groups when we talk about 4 and 5 year old? Is the training, are the structures that we've got in place at that age, are we developing players as well as we possibly can? Because there's evidence out there that the input and the number of touches you have on a football between the ages of 4 and 10 will determine what type of player you're going to be when you're 25. And are we doing enough in those early stages? Should we be doing more from a development perspective? But again, you need to do the research, you need to do the reviews, you need to understand exactly what's happening out there in a wider context and translate that back into a Scottish setting. There are very few that make it to the very top level, but I mean, when we look at Club Academy Scotland, over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been around about 20% of players that have come out the academy, the last age group of the academy. There's been about 20% that have been offered a contract with a professional club, which is I think that's a decent number. I mean, I know from my own Partick Thistle days, when we had our academy in place, if we signed 3 or 4 players from our academy to go and get involved in the first team, that was a fairly successful year, because it's not easy to do. And those are the types of numbers that we're seeing. So whilst everybody will talk about 0.7% of players make it, that's at the very, very highest elite international level. There are a lot more than that make it across the country.
Just what I'm really wanting to hear is how you manage that learning. Have you got the structure in place to be able to cascade that down through the coaching structure?
That's part of the work in progress. So
Okay.
I think that the first question is, we need to do the learning, we need to understand where we want to go. The next stage of that is, how do we put the processes in place to make sure that we do it, and engage with clubs, engage with players, engage with stakeholders to make sure that the processes are right across the game. Because listen, everybody wants a really successful Scotland national team. Everybody wants as many people as we can playing sport up and down the country. We're a sporting nation in as much as we love sport and we watch sport. We're not a sporting nation in as much as we don't play anything like as much as we should. We don't engage as much as we should from a sporting perspective. And again, we would be more than happy to come back to a committee here like this, or set up something externally that gets sports governing bodies round the table to go, right, how do we make sure we can get access to school facilities? How do we make sure we can get the right provisions in place, the right access to changing rooms, after schools, when traditionally they've been locked up? It can't be difficult to find a way to unlock that. And we are engaging with COSLA. We are talking to them about how we get access to the school estate. We've been speaking to local authorities about how do we make sure that every time there's a development of 500 houses going in somewhere, there's some sort of sporting facility that sits alongside that, because it has to. If we want to change the health and well-being of the nation, we have to think about those things that are outside the box, because what we're doing at the moment isn't working.
Okay, Camilla.
Thank you. Can I thank both of you for your attendance this morning, and also for the offer to visit a CAS Academy in Scotland?
Yeah,
I'm sure
please
some
take us up on that.
Some of
Please
the
take us
committee
up on
members
that.
will take you up on that. And I'm going to briefly suspend for a changeover of witnesses. Our next item on the agenda is to take oral evidence from the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care and supporting officials on Legislative Consent Memorandum LCM S662 on the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill. The purpose of the bill is to make provision for a terminally ill person living in England or Wales, aged 18 and above, with capacity, who has been ordinarily resident in England or Wales for 12 months and who is registered with a GP practice in England or Wales, to be given on request assistance to end their own life. Legislative Consent Memorandum S662 relates to an amendment agreed during the House of Commons report stage, which extends the scope of some of the provisions of the bill to Scotland. Specifically, Clause 43 makes provision requiring the Secretary of State to make regulations prohibiting the publication, printing, distribution or designing anywhere of advertisements whose purpose or effect is to promote a voluntary assisted dying service, and prohibiting causing the publication, printing, distribution or designing of such advertisements. Clause 43 also provides that any regulations may not amend this Act and must provide with any offence created by the regulation is punishable with a fine. A VAD service for the purposes of this clause means the service as set out in accordance with the Act, i.e. VAD services in England and Wales. Whereas the analysis prepared for the bill's sponsor concluded that Clause 43 did not trigger the need for consent for the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government took a different view that Clause 43 appears to be for a purpose, namely prohibition of advertising, that is within the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament. And I welcome to the committee Neil Gray, Cabinet Secretary for Health and Social Care, Ailsa Garland, Solicitor, and Susan Wilson, Assisted Dying Shadow Bill Team Manager for Scottish Government. And I believe, Cabinet Secretary, that you would like to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about the legislative consent memorandum lodged by the Scottish Government on the 27th of August, which recommends that the Scottish Parliament gives its consent to Clause 43 of Kim Leadbeater's MP's Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill. Let me be clear that I am here today due to the provision described in the LCM and my recommendation for it. It is not in any way a comment or opinion on Ms Leadbeater's bill, which is for the UK Parliament to decide upon. The committee will already be aware that nothing in Kim Leadbeater's bill has any effect on Liam MacArthur's bill in the Scottish Parliament, which the committee knows is going through an entirely different process. The LCM process is part of our constitutional settlement, and that is what I am here to provide information on, the effect of Clause 43 in Scotland and why I am recommending support. Turning to the LCM itself, Clause 43 of the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill imposes a duty on the Secretary of State for Health in the UK to make regulations to prohibit the publication, printing, distribution or designing of advertisements whose purpose or effect is to promote the England and Wales Voluntary Assisted Dying Service. The purpose of Clause 43 is stated to be to prevent pressure from being put on vulnerable people or the undermining of national suicide prevention strategies through the unethical advertisement of the England and Wales service. By consenting to this provision, the Scottish Parliament would be agreeing that that service introduced could not be promoted in Scotland. This is the wish of the UK Parliament, whom I believe should determine if and where the English and Welsh Assisted Dying Service is to be advertised. The Scottish Government's view is that Clause 43 is for a purpose within the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament, considering the C7 reservation of the Scotland Act. The C7 reservation covers regulation of, among other things, misleading and comparative advertising, except regulation specifically in relation to food, tobacco and tobacco products. It does not reserve advertising generally. As such, we believe that the Scottish Parliament's consent is required for Clause 43 and that this should be given so that we do not find ourselves in a situation where the English and Welsh Assisted Dying Service can be advertised in Scotland but not in England and Wales. I hope that the committee finds that explanation and outline of the Scottish position helpful, and I am of course happy to answer the committee's questions, Convener.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I have not received any indication from members that they wish to ask any questions on this item. The fourth item on our agenda... Oh, apologies, Mr Harvey.
Sorry, I wasn't aware that you'd asked for a previous indication of desire to ask questions. I would like to ask a question, not about the reserved devolved competence and the requirement for an LCM, but the content of the provision that the LCM covers. Are you confident that it will apply only to what would commonly be understood as advertising and won't inhibit the publication of, for example, arguments about the policy merits of the legislation or about how services should be delivered, or the provision of factual information regarding the service?
Thank you, Convener. That would be my expectation, as Mr Harvey has outlined. Obviously, it's legislation in the United Kingdom Parliament, so it's not an area that I have control over, but and it's for members of the UK Parliament to determine. But my expectation would be, as Mr Harvey has outlined, and that's why we've put forward this LCM, to ensure that we are in line with other parts of the UK around advertising or promotion, as opposed to the production of factual information.
Thank you.
Apologies, Mr Harvey. I wasn't aware you had a question. Okay. The fourth item on our agenda is to consider the following negative instrument, the Personal Injuries NHS Charges Amounts Scotland Amendment Regulations 2025. These regulations amend the Personal Injuries NHS Charges Amounts Scotland Regulations 2006, the principal regulations, which make provision in relation to the amount of NHS charges which can be recovered from a person who pays compensation to an injured person where that injured person has received National Health Service treatment or ambulance services. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument at its meeting on the 9th of September and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion to annul has so far been received in relation to this instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Does any member disagree with this? No. Okay, thank you. At next week's meeting, we will begin taking oral evidence as part of the committee's inquiry into ASD and ADHD pathways and support. And that concludes the public part of our meeting today.